Um, Seeing that it's 1 minute after, I'll call the meeting of the Light Board Advisory Committee to order on April 7th, 2021. I need to find the agenda. I just found it for the link, but somehow. But the first item is, do we have minutes today?
Yes, you should have September and October's minutes for approval today.
I don't remember those being sent out, and apologies if I was supposed to do that. Does everyone else have them? Okay. Well, are there any edits to those minutes?
But is Steve talking? Steve, you're on mute if you're trying to talk.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, one of the minutes was for October 21st, 2020. I think that's right, correct?
Yes.
And it says present were LBAC Chair Travis Frank, Vice Chair Michael McRae.
Yes, I was not chair at that time.
No. So, I mean, the minutes looked really good, but that kind of threw me that maybe there was something else that needed to be. I don't know if that was the only issue or if the dates were wrong or whatever, but.
So it said that Travis was chair when you were still chair then? Is that right?
Yeah, we had the reorganizational meeting in February where Travis was elected chair and Mike was elected vice chair.
Yeah, I got that off of the website. I looked to see who was chair and who was vice chair, but the website was current, but these were old. That's probably where I got it wrong.
Okay, yeah, so, all right. So I don't know if you want to just revise that and come back, or if you want to, if that was the only change, we could probably figure out how to change it now.
I mean, I think the change is I was vice chair at that point and Steve was chair. I assume Sue,
Right,
you're
yeah.
keeping the master copy, you're making the edits.
And it would be, yeah, it would be, Steve called the meeting to
Right.
order, and present were LBAC chairs, me and vice chair Travis.
Right. So I don't know how you guys want to handle that.
That's easy enough to just amend and approve as amended.
Yeah.
I can just submit them like that.
Are there any other edits to the October minutes? Well, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve as amended. And we'll have to do a roll call vote, just by the way. I don't know if we've been doing that in the past, but there's a reminder from the town that open meeting law, we have to go through and do a roll call vote.
Oh. Yeah, so I move that we amend the minutes, approve the minutes as just amended.
Your second?
Second.
Okay, we'll say Bob Forrester seconded.
Sure.
I'll just start and then I'll just read first names. And I believe the official practice is that you should state your full name and then yay or nay. So Travis Frank, I'm going to abstain because I don't have a copy in front of me. I somehow missed that. Ralph?
Ralph Jones, aye.
Dave?
Steve Kleonsky, aye. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Dave, I think you have to be audible, unmuted, because people might be on the phone.
Dave Beavers, aye.
Steve?
Steve Kleonsky, aye.
Michael?
Michael McRae, aye.
Bob?
Bob Forrester, aye.
And I think that's everyone that's on the committee.
See John.
John is here.
Oh, sorry, John. Sorry.
No problem. John Abe, aye.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Craig. Okay, so we have another set of minutes from November.
September, actually.
September, excuse me. Does anyone have any edits for the September minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes from September 2020.
Do we hear a second? Dave Beaver seconds. Travis Frank abstain. Ralph,
Ralph Jones, aye.
Dave,
Dave Beavers, aye.
Steve,
Steve Fleonsky, aye.
Michael,
Michael McCray, aye.
Bob,
Bob Forrester, aye.
John,
John Abe, aye.
okay.
I just wanted to say also, those minutes are very detailed and complete. Did a very good job.
Thank you. It's easy with a recording. You can go back and double check.
No, it's a lot of work, though.
Yeah. Thanks.
So we're back to time of use discussion. I know that Aiden sent the latest set of slides out. I hope everyone had a chance to review them. And Craig, do you want to walk us through it?
Yes, just as a friendly reminder, if you recall at the last meeting, there were a couple open items we wanted to finalize before last meeting, but we were delayed a little bit. One was the solar buyback, so we took a hard look at that. The other was the low-income customers. We wanted to make sure that the data was correct in the analysis that was given to us to make sure we weren't harming those customers. There's actually a third takeaway, which was the timing of a pilot. And we'll get to that after the slideshow, but we looked into the data that we're getting from our meters, and on the good news front, looks like we're getting all of our data correctly, with some minor blips here and there that we're still looking through, but it doesn't appear to be an issue from a data aggregation standpoint. That said, Becker and I think Dave with his assistance, or Dave with Becca's assistance, one or the other, put together a slideshow here. They dug into some of this data very deeply. And with that, I'm going to let them present the slideshow that was sent out yesterday. Becker, if you want to pick it up.
Aiden, are you there? Do you want to make me co-host so I can drive the slides, or do you want to do that?
Yeah, I'll just make you co-host.
All right. There we go. All right. Everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. All right, Dave, do you want to take it away?
Sure. And so Beck and I went through a few things. So what we're going to look at here is kind of where we've been and where we're at, and show the progression. So everybody's up to speed. So kind of under rate evolution, in this table on the left, that's our current peaks. Summer is 1 to 7, winter's 4 to 8. And so just comparing the rates to give you a sense of how the rates have changed. The current flat rate obviously is about 19. Back in October last year, to give you an example, we're talking about summer peaker, that was close to 50. Just had that one peak and everything else was off peak. And then the two rates on the right in the kind of peach color, those are the current rates. I think those are the two that are being proposed to go forward with, and see if anybody has a preference whether weekends are included or not included. And so just kind of off the bat, you can see, from October, the impact of adding, the 4 to 8 in the winter, that's the difference basically, is, the rate dropped a little bit from 49 to 45. That's with the weekends included. The off peak is basically the same. It's around 13 and something. And then you have that winter on peak. So it just gives you a sense of the evolution. The rates haven't changed that much. Obviously, then if you take the weekends out, and you have a lot more, or actually a lot less peak time, then the rates go up past 50. Any questions on this? Just wanted to throw this at you to see kind of where we've been and where we landed now.
Dave, this doesn't go exactly to this table, but we have an inclining block rate at 1600 kWh.
Mhm.
How does that, how is that dealt with here? Is that part of the time of use rate, or is it not? Or
It's not part of the rate, and if I remember correctly, that's on the distribution side. The time of use here is all on the power supply side. And
Alright.
distribution, we're not touching. So in theory, I guess you could have a rate with that declining block if you wanted it. But for right now, it's just simple. It's just the distribution is about 8 cents a kilowatt hour. It doesn't change.
And Steve, we do have a separate proposal to address the fixed rates, but we figured we'd deal with that separate after time of use. So that'll come maybe next year.
okay, thank you.
When thinking about just days in the calendar year, and you mentioned, Dave, you summarized it pretty cleanly of like, obviously the rates go higher when you have fewer peak hours. But comparing the October 2020 column with the weekend exclusion column, I guess the last column, I mean, are all the costs in the summer and they fall on those weekends? Why? I just noticed that like it's almost a 10-cent difference, 9-cent difference in the peak rate. Even though in one there's half a year excluded, and the other one there's only 52 weekends and maybe some holidays.
Yeah, you're right, Travis. Particularly in the summer, the bulk of the costs don't hit on the weekend, right? So in scenario one, where we include the weekend, you're adding more hours. That kind of dilutes the cost of it. Whereas in scenario two, there's no dilution.
But I guess I'm interested comparing it to the October 2020. Like why it seems like there's actually fewer peak hours in the October 2020 because there's no winter peaking hours. And somehow the rate is lower than I would assume there's fewer peak hours in these October 2020 than there is in the scenario two. Maybe that's wrong.
In the summer, the peak hours are the same in that scenario. In the winter, right, there are no peak hours in the winter, right? But in the summer, those hours are the same. So basically, as far as the hours go, the summer peak of October 2020 is exactly the same as scenario one.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm asking my question very clearly, but I think it's just because the costs are in the summer, but like the bulk of the cost, but I could be. And
The transmission peaks and what have you that were captured in scenarios 1 and 2 were somewhat ignored in the summer peaker, if I remember correctly. From the off months through the winter months, all that was, and Dave, certainly you can speak to this much better than I can, but I thought the summer peak had just looked at those 3 or 4 summer months and captured the capacity peak there, maybe a 1 or 2 transmission peaks, but the rest of that data was, I don't want to say ignored, but somewhat ignored in the calculation. Is that a correct statement?
The summer peak capture the capacity and the transmission for those summer months. I mean, the other thing going on here, UFS had a slightly different way of calculating these rates than I did. So that could be also impacting it a bit. And we could dig into it. I mean, and see exactly what's going on, but that's
the summer peaker.
The 3 cents off. So that's kind of like, to me, that's pretty equivalent given different methodologies involved.
The summer peaker in scenario 1 looked at the same summer period. It's addressing the same costs and the same hours. Summer peaker included the weekends and holidays. So it's just the winter that's different. Does that make sense, Travis?
well, okay, so I'll try one more time, and maybe it's not going to come out. But when I look, but maybe I'll start with what's underlying. When I look at the summer peaker column compared to the scenario 1 or scenario 2 columns, I'm like, well, that's actually a simpler plan we don't have to worry about winter heat pumps, et cetera else. And the rate is pretty much like the current scenario 1, more or less. It's cheaper than scenario 2 with, where we have the weekends out. But to me, I don't understand why that is the 50, it still stays below 50 cents, even though we've now thrown half the year or so. Well, October through May is not in any peak. There's no peak hours in those months. So so using that simple rule that Dave articulated, that, the more peak hours, the lower the rate. I don't understand how this has a relatively low rate, below 50 cents for its peak rate, but where half the year is not being peaked at all. Is that
In reference to scenario 2, though, is that what you're
no?
saying?
I'm saying the October 2020, and compared to either scenario 1 or scenario 2.
I think I understand what you're asking, Travis, and maybe this helps. The summer is completely independent of the winter. They don't interact.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, is just all the costs, the bulk of the costs that we're trying to capture in peak hours actually are summer peak costs. That's what I think the explanation is, that the winter is peaking in extra costs and things, like the capacity charge is a summer thing and not on the winter months. Is that
right? Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's different in the summer.
But I thought the transmission charges did accrue all year round.
Correct. Yeah, in the winter you got 8 months of transmission charges. So under scenario 1, where you put that 4 to 8 p.m. peak, that's where the transmission charges go.
And as we all know, the transmission charges are increasing every year, year over year, and quickly becoming a more expensive scenario than the capacity peaks that we're experiencing. So I think it's important that we do try to capture those transmission peaks.
If we excluded the weekends from the summer peaker scenario, that summer on peak price would be closer to that 58 cents.
Yeah, the October 2020 is including holidays and weekends, just like scenario 1 does.
Yep. But if we were to change the structure, then it would mirror closely scenario 2. Whoops, sorry about that.
Can I ask, Travis's questions have brought up something for me. Is the summer peak or October 2020 option essentially still on the table, or was the intent in including it here, sort of as it states here, the evolution of our time of race thinking? Because there is actually some appeal to the simplicity of that model, and if it's effectively doing what scenario 1 does in just a simpler fashion, and that's an appropriate way to allocate costs, maybe it's still really actually worth keeping around just for its simplicity.
The intent here, Mick, was just to show the evolution. I think there's some good reasons to have the winter peaks, and we can talk about it. There's some slides later on we can talk about, particularly when you get into trying to incentivize storage. Having that peak over the full year can really help out. But anyways, from what the way this is presented, the scenario 1 and scenario 2 are the 2 proposed to go forward with.
And the point Craig raised earlier about how if we go with just that summer peak, we're missing the bulk of our transmission costs. If we do that, that was kind of a rationale for ruling that one out months back.
And I guess then maybe that was my implied question, was that if we had proposed that previously, I assume we would have not excluded or sort of correctly captured things. So sort of, I guess, embedded in my question was, have we realized that summer peak or October 2020 is just fundamentally insufficient to maintain revenue adequacy for Belmont Light across all customers? Or does it actually do that, but it's not necessarily providing a signal for customer participation in the winter, but it still maintains revenue adequacy, recognizing there's 8 months worth of transmission peaks in there, but really the sort of driver of that is simply summer targeting. So I guess does the October peaker just not work? or does it work, but not work as well as we want it to?
That's the right way to say it, Michael. It's a revenue neutral rate structure, but for most of the year, we're not sending price signals to induce shifting.
Great. I think we could probably move to the next slide. Thank you, Becca.
So this is, again, to show some of the evolution, and this is, excuse me, in the customer impacts of some of the, so starting with summer peaker again in October 2020, we saw a little bit just across everybody in rate A, just a little bit of an increase on average. And then across different types of technologies, we saw savings on an annual basis. So those are numbers just pulled from a presentation back in October. So it's two scenarios before. The first next row, if you will, is the UFS scenario 1. So that's weekends and holidays included. And so that's the most comparable to the summer peaker. And so you can kind of compare there is a little bit of difference in some of the technologies. Oh, there we go. And so there's two models there. There's the UFS model, that's their most recent numbers that they sent over. And then the model we've been using, the same model from October, is also used there for comparison. And so similar overall, kind of all shooting in the same direction, which for me makes me confident when we look at those goals we had that, with all this information, I do think these rates that are proposed do hit all those goals. There is some difference, like in a UFS model versus a TOU compare model. And Beck and I went through that the other day. And so just a little difference in how they handle some of the load data and stuff. But again, in general, it's all kind of shooting the same way. I think gives you confidence. Any questions on this?
Yeah, sorry, could you, just to make sure I've got my head around this right, model TOU compare is essentially Dave and Becca. Model USF is the UFS consultants. They're using, those two models are using the rate structure we just saw on the previous slide, just to make sure that I'm thinking through this. And then the results that you present from that are under TOU compare, that's Dave and Becca went through and used the rates on the previous slide, and these are the results for those categories. That's what's being presented. So it just didn't quite follow the sort of what the differences were there. And
you got that right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I do think, though, it's important to point out that first bullet at the bottom of the page, right? The data sets that were used were slightly different. So for that, we wouldn't have expected the exact same outcome. But to Dave's point, they're trending in the same direction, which is a good thing. That everyone's going in the same direction with it.
On that end, does that imply, like for the PV column, it's hard to do a standard deviation with 2 data points, but if you're using the same things and one of them is 5 and one of them is somewhere between 2 to 3 times more than that, gives me low confidence that, like,
Michael,
is there more there?
If you look at the second note there.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No worries.
So then that narrows down. All the other ones are a lot closer together, and you're sort of, at least for the ones that we have data to compare, within 1 or 2%. And so okay. That's
Dave included the buyback in his analysis, and UFS was only looking at consumption. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison.
And so UFS didn't look at the low income or didn't model low income, or?
They did, but they did it incorrectly.
That was, if you could recall, Steve, that was the issue we had last month where they compared the low income to all of rate A as their backdrop. And that was kind of where we took the data, took the tool that they created, dug through it to verify it was a well put together tool. And then we plugged in our numbers with Dave and Becca doing the bulk of that to come up with the analysis on that, on the low income.
So, and just one of the takeaways from this is that as far as like the actual annual impact on a bill, the UFS1 scenario and UFS2 scenario aren't that different. I think there's gonna be a lot more individual variation than anything, but as classes, they're pretty equivalent as far as annual savings or annual change in bill.
And I'm sorry,
But my question of,
John, go ahead, but you're
go
breaking up
ahead,
a little bit.
Travis. My question, lead alone. You guys have a distribution, 2% sort of within a margin of error. Kind of, I guess, cross tabbing it two ways. One would be what percentage of the customer save versus lose money, and maybe, you know. And then the second question would be, is there an issue where they might save money during the summer, but then lose it?
Yeah, John, to get to your second point, in general, at these rates, you'll save money in the winter. Most everybody would, but like the air conditioning season will be more expensive. And so these numbers are the net. And we'll get into some potential load shifting. If you could particularly load shift in the summer, you can actually save quite a bit of money and you know, reduce that summer bill. To the first part, we actually got a draft later on, but for like the rate 8 at 0%, that's pretty normal. So about half the people would spend less and half the people would spend more on average. That answers your question.
It does. I'm looking through the lens for the low income customers, where I think we want to make sure we kind of do no harm versus, you know, providing an opportunity for everyone to save 2% seems a little bit like it's margin of error, where in that scenario, people might sign up, but they could actually be losing money, especially during the summer or during the year. So that.
Sure, yeah, and one of the hopes is, I mean, if there is anybody low income that signs up for it, we would hope to take their load profile, you know, probably from 219, because 220 with COVID is a little bit odd, and actually run these numbers for their individual situation and say, hey, based on your 219 load profile, here's what we would expect for you to spend under this rate.
Yeah,
Great,
John,
thank
one
you.
of our proposals that I have in my mind will be to be very careful about what low income customers we do enroll. If they want to be involved, we'll really vet them thoroughly and make sure that they'll come out ahead.
Thank you.
That sounds really good, Becca. What's the number of accounts that are all under low income? Is it like not number, percentage maybe is a better number, or like, is it 2%?
421 is the customer number.
Okay, so it's like 4%, 4 to 5%, something like that, right? I want to just draw, and I want to check this, but it's seemingly, looking left to right, it seemingly, if you electrify, you save more money. So like one of the goals of this was encouraging electrification or supporting that initiative. And you know, if you kind of start on the left and have an EV and a heat pump and then keep adding things, it seems like the savings do build up. Is that a fair assessment? Am I reading too much into the table?
I think it gets into, in general, I don't think it's a additive necessarily, but and there's some slides we'll get to in a second, but it's going to really depend on how you can control your loads during the peak periods. And you can save actually a lot more than shown here if you can do some load shifting. But in general, particularly with the heat, if you had a heat pump, I guess, for example, I mean, so much your loads go into that winter off peak period that proportionally, yeah, you're going to start getting some savings, more savings.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, not additive. I do understand that, but I guess it's like, you know, EV, you save some money if you can do this. heat pump, what about the same, depending on that alone. But then of course, like when you get to the last column, the PV and EV, then that's actually, I guess, the big savings.
If PV and EV are a good combo, it's another utility study. They always seem to come out on top. The best.
Thanks.
Dave, this is Bob. Looking at this slide and thinking of presenting it in a forum to those who haven't spent the time that we have discussing it. The 6 columns on the right are all negative, and then under the UFS 1 and 2 scenarios, the rate A column is neutral, 0, which suggests that if that's all there is, that in total, it's going to be negative. So it won't be revenue neutral to the Belmont Light. Also, just pointing out in rate A, and I understand that there will be some winners and some losers, but rate A is so much bigger as a proportion of our base that it probably has components too. And those who win will probably be those who don't have air conditioning. And those who lose will be those who do. And so some sort of a breakout there would probably be better disclosure.
That's a good call, Bob. We did look at different groups within rate A. What were they, Dave? We did the top 10%, top 25%. So we already have some of that work. We just haven't shown it to you, but I like that the point about to a wider audience, it should be shown.
Sure.
Yeah. Also, Bob, I think you nailed another point there where right now we're just really showing the customer impact, and we're not ignoring the impact on Belmont Light, but we're not really displaying it here. Inherently, we know that Belmont Light will win because our capacity and our transmission peak should be lowered, and there's a savings inherently built in there. But I think you're absolutely right. When we get this in front of the public in a forum type environment, we need to show both sides of that story. Show the wins for the Belmont Light as well as the wins for the customers.
And the wins for a particular group of customers within rate A and losses for another group within rate A.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the
we're
other
hoping
key
that
to
Bob
this
would
is
go
that
one further
oh,
step
sorry.
for each individual have their own individual win or loss, right? So they can make a decision whether to join. That's the goal.
And the other key to this slide is this is without behavior change. So this was designed to be revenue neutral for rate A, but as we get into the next slides, we'll see just a little bit about the nuance with across the board with shifting and what different scenarios will look like.
Sure.
Michael?
Thanks. I have 2 questions here. One of them is there a category or enough people in Belmont that you could also add in for the whole home heat pumps and PV? Because I know at least one person, and I actually know a couple people who have heat pumps and solar on the roof. So I think that would be an interesting category. I can tell you, I haven't vetted it thoroughly, but I threw my 2020 numbers into, I think I mentioned last time, Sense recently launched a time of use ability. So I just went back and said, type in all of the time of use rates that you guys provided. What does it look like for me for 2020? And my usage went down by about 2%. So it's roughly close to what you're seeing here for the whole home heat pump, actually maybe a little bit less. And I attribute that in part to the fact that I don't need to run my heat pumps a lot of times all night overnight. I would certainly shift that behavior if electricity was cheaper overnight. So I think I'm almost an opposite good example here for maybe others who just leave them on all the time. But I think having the solar shown in there would be helpful. And And I am, oh, sorry, the second point was, in terms of going in front of the public, I mean, this currently is in front of the public and is also recorded, but I think I would encourage the framing of this to be, it's fair maybe to say winners and losers, but we also have people today that are subsidizing other ratepayers in Belmont. And so if we fundamentally believe in our time of use sort of mission statement of fair cost allocation, what this is doing is sort of making the rates more fair. And so I realize that for somebody whose costs will go up annually, they're going to look and say, oh, well, I'm not being treated fairly. My costs are more expensive. But I think we need to maintain a sort of neutral and third-party objective view of that to say, you have been benefiting from people who have very different usage patterns and who are effectively subsidizing your lower rate versus if we look at the cost you actually incur from your usage patterns, you fairly should be paying more. So this is more fair for you because now you are fairly paying your fair share of the total costs. So it's a tap dance to figure out the exact right language that is true and accurate there. But I think I look at this chart and I say all of the people with PVs, EVs, whole home heat pumps, et cetera, are overpaying unfairly, and that this rectifies sort of that cost unfairness as opposed to where we're going sort of will fair unfair. So I just think we need to be mindful of how we frame this going forward.
So Michael, the unfairness is because of the renewables that are on the electric system?
No, the unfairness would be, you know, I use 2.5 megawatt hours in January, but we have an annual flat rate. And so I pay a disproportionately larger amount of the capacity charge in our 19.3 cent rate, because in that 19.3 cents, we've sort of smeared like peanut butter the capacity charge over every hour of every month of every year. Why am I paying anything for capacity when I use a lot in the middle of winter? Why am I paying anything for transmission when I use a lot overnight for heating? Somebody who really is just say like, hey, I turn on and I use a lot of electricity in the middle of summer in January or in July or August, and I really incur the cost of capacity. That has nothing really to do with the renewables on the system or on anybody's house. It's when you use electricity and how we allocate costs today versus the time of use.
Any other questions on this? So Travis, how are we doing for time? There's a whole nother, we could talk about this for a long time, but
yeah, let's speed it up a little bit. And I know that
Okay.
I started off with some questions even on like the first table, so I'll try to hold back a little bit too.
it's good discussion. It's
Yeah.
it's pretty thick. Okay, so this is let's see, and maybe okay, I'll just do this is rate A, so this is all 10,000 plus customers. And so just give you a load profile. So this takes the kilowatt hour load and breaks it up into different peaks. So you can see on average about half of the load is in the winter off peak. Another half or 25% is in the summer off peak. So 75% of the load on average for everybody is in off peak periods. And then we have those intense winter and summer on peak periods, about 25%. So a reference back to this, it's kind of interesting as you go through different types of technologies, how this changes a little bit. I guess go next. Okay, so this, to show you, this is a new concept. Rather than try to figure out, you know, how much the average person might reduce their load or whatever, we went to a different concept, and particularly maybe to show this for the outreach would be great to get some feedback on this. So on the left side, we have the winter load shift, you know, from 0 to 100%. So 100% means that you don't, you know, you shifted all of your load from 4 to 8 p.m. and summer load shift also. So 100% there would mean like from 1 to 7 p.m. in the summer, you shifted all your load. And so what this shows is say starting at 0% at $0, that was the average kind of over the whole class of grade A. But if you can say shift 20% of your summer load, you know, maybe smart thermostats or whatever, and then 20% of your winter load, you know, you kind of go down and then across, and you say that would save $73 or about, you know, 5% of the electric bill. And that's the stuff that should line up with Belmont Light savings, and that's when we talk about revenue neutral. Basically, the customer's reducing their cost, but that also should reduce the cost for Belmont Lights. And so that's a win-win for everybody. So anyways, if you any feedback on this, I know there's a lot of numbers there. It could probably be formatted differently, but rather than try to pick one number that everybody would be to, we thought we'd show this. And then also talk about the technology. You know, at 20%, that's probably smart thermostats. Getting out to 100%, that's probably energy storage, right? But there's probably some other technologies along the way we could talk about. But any thoughts on that?
Would you just, sorry, and I see Michael's hand, but would you just state the lessons? 100% is what
Well,
technology?
that'd be battery storage, right? If you
Oh, battery
store-
storage. Yeah.
Right. So
I know, I got it.
Yeah, you're off the grid during those.
So I think I see Michael and then Steve.
Just real quickly, I really like this. I think it's a great way to present it. The only thing that kind of gives me a little pause is, you know, other than battery storage, people who aren't necessarily like, oh yeah, you know, I'll turn the lights off a little bit and I'll go to 0, right? No, you know, sort of something in here that maybe, and maybe that's exactly what you said, Dave, of we do it with a little bit of technology and you say, you know, across the top, like here's just a little bit of turning lights on and off. But I would worry that if we put this out in front of people, they're going to look at it and be like, boom, I can save $336. No problem. I'm just going to shift that load. It's easy. You know, maybe I'll only save 308. But I think it's probably more realistic that people are going to be within those sort of first 2 rows and columns, and you're going to save $40 maybe, because 20%, I mean, that's a lot of energy shifting. So something just to sort of set expectations. But I think for technical people who really understand what's going on, I think this is a great way to present it. So I appreciate you putting this together.
Good.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Michael. Also, so Dave, so in every one of these cells, the numbers represent revenue neutral to Belmont Light?
Right. So as you shift load off those expensive periods into cheaper periods, right, Belmont Light should also save because it doesn't have to supply the expensive power. Does that make sense?
And that's only is that taking account just capacity and transmission, or is there something else?
And energy too, right? Distribution, there's no impact. So the whole distribution side, you can just push aside because we're still charging the same distribution rate.
Right. But you're also modeling, you're taking into account high hours of energy costs.
Correct.
And how did you model that? I mean, what data did you use? What years did you use, or how did you go about doing that?
The load here is from 2019. So this is for rate A. This is everybody in Belmont, all residential rate A customers. And the periods we've been talking about the periods over the last year and stuff. So the summer period is 1 to 7, and the winter period is 4 to 8. So the 48 captures a transmission event, right? Remember? And the
Yeah. No, I understand. Okay.
And it's our actual cost from 2019 as well, Steve.
Do you think modeling a different year would make any difference, or you think this is pretty close?
It could, like I know with 220, everybody's home more, so it has a bit of a different of an impact. But as far as the idea of for shifting load for Belmont Lights, it should be the same, right? Anytime you shift load from a high cost period, that means Belmont Lights not supplying high cost power.
Steve, is part of your question sort of what's the actual cost for wholesale power, and that if February 2019 was a really expensive month, and February 2020 on the wholesale power procurement side was a cheaper month. That would change this. And if that is your question, I would slip in also just further understanding that of how much of ours is hedged versus exposed floating costs, and that would mitigate the ability for sort of when and how price on the wholesale market's expensive and not. But I don't, if that's not your question, I don't want to hijack it.
Yeah, no, that was a question. So I
Okay.
appreciate that there's a bunch, most of it is hedged, but we also have seen in some past years some very high spikes, particularly in January.
These are the UFS rates, so there's no rate. I didn't do any rate guesstimate for this. I think they use about 3 years of data. Whatever their standard methodology is, they use to do this. But maybe we should move along really quick, and I'm happy to talk on the phone more. Maybe go past. Let's go to whole home heat pump. I know that's when we talk. There we go. So this is the same kind of load distribution for whole home heat pumps. I think it's about 21 in Belmont. And so as you might expect, the winter off peak goes way up. It goes from 50% to 64%. And particularly why the whole home heat pumps would benefit under this rate, you see that summer peak rate drops from 11% to 6%. So they're proportionally have a lot less power in that expensive summer period because they're using so much in the winter, and that's why the rate benefits them. And next slide real quick. And so we have the different technologies that they're available in the presentation. But this is kind of the load shift for whole home heat pumps on the winter. That might be a little bit limited, probably limited because in the deep winter you can't shift your load. But in the fall and the spring, you probably can get some, and then the summer load shift, and that's air conditioning. So there, you can have some technologies to do that. I would say the savings are not shown here, but the winter heating savings without any load shifting are $300 for heating. But that goes down by $100. There's extra $100 of cooling in the summer. But you can see if you shift 40% of your load in the summer, you get back to over $300 difference. Is there any questions on that before we go on?
I will just make a general comment about the style of table. Again, I echoing Michael's, I do find this a nice way to look at things. I like the symmetry of the table, quanta or whatever, every 20%, but I do wonder if there needs to be a little more resolution between 0 and 20. But I don't know how to do that and keep a pretty table. So.
Okay, that can be worked, and it can also just be a calculator to plug in the number you want, right? But,
yeah. Okay. But anyway, and some of these technologies, when we talk about whole home heat pump and EVs and things, where like I know the technology, like the charger can be programmed and things. That's a little more. I can see that, but yeah. Thanks.
Sure. In the interest of time, let's go on to. Could we show the pie chart for the buyback? Becca? Okay, here we go. So just for comparison, these are buyback kilowatt hours. And so toward the end, we're going to talk about the buyback. And just to give you a sense, about half, this is from 2019, about half of the buyback kilowatt hours hit on the winter off peak. That might sound a little strange, but you have to remember winter includes April and May under this definition, and that's when that's the super rich time for buyback is just before the air conditioning season, but when you have a lot of sun. 20% hit in the summer peak, on peak, and then that's kind of where we'd want them to hit. That's when they help the most. And then a little bit, again, this is probably mostly in April and May, that 3% on peak. So you get a little buyback kilowatt hours this time of year. Okay. So I just want to show that to to kind of preface the discussion later on the buyback. But that's how they fall as far as the kilowatt hours go in each of those.
Steve, real quick, just to make sure I understand, this is not, what's the easiest way? Like, this is not front of meter. This is behind the meter. You presume that the house has all of its load, and sort of after air conditioning, after everything else, you're going to suck up a whole bunch of your PV. You're avoiding a high cost on peak in the summer, but you're also not sending very much back. Is that the right way?
And this one's actually, we skipped that. That's in the previous slide. I'm sorry, I skipped it just for time. No, this is the kilowatt hours that Belmont buys.
Yeah.
So
Okay. That's,
yeah.
That's it. Yeah. That would be the sort of behind the meter. You've used up everything. I'm just like trying to make sure I'm thinking about this right. From if you shifted your load and you said, hey, right now I really want to reduce, I want to make as much money from selling back as I could. But yeah, we're on the same page. Thank you.
Yeah, and this rate actually incentivizes that. If you cut your load during the summer peak, then your buyback's healthy, and it incentivizes it. Okay, so next slide. So to kind of answer your question, Michael. So this is PV customers load shifting. So the same situation. So just changing your rate, you get about 9%, right? So that's a 0-0. But then you can start shifting like your summer load, and that's where you can see that's where it benefits both you and Belmont Light because you're getting off that peak. So what's important here is for people with PV currently who want to add storage. Depending on what their loads are, how big their battery is, you think, well, what's the maximum? If I added storage, what's the maximum kind of savings on my Belmont Light bill? And that would be the 100 and 100 down there at about $700 a year. So that's.
We should mention that this buyback scenario is the one where we're just taking off distribution. So we're crediting generation and transmission.
Right. Thank you. Okay. But anyways, I do think there's for energy storage, which is a benefit to everybody, that this rate does really, it does help out, as you can see at the maximum potential there. It's about $700 a year if you can configure loads and get enough storage.
Does that insight, the approximately 700, does that say that if Belmont Light were to, pay battery, give everyone in town a battery, or as an example, like there'd be savings, they could spend up to $700 a year to finance that kind of thing? Like, is that and come out neutral?
The issue would be is the battery is behind the meter, right? So the customer is going to pay less in their bill, right? So if Belmont Light paid them $700, and the customer's double dipping, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Naturally. And also, if they screw up, if they don't ship summer loads or the battery doesn't work, there's a natural penalty here if they don't get the benefit, right?
Sure. Okay, thank you.
I think I am now, I thought I was understanding this, now I'm confused on this slide, and I think it would maybe be helpful for me to, I was actually going to suggest doing a slide that is purely just a battery and sort of the, like, what is the maximum revenue you could make if you install the battery, you charge it off peak to the maximum extent on every day, and then you discharge it fully during the on peak periods, and sort of just carve out a battery's behavior on its own. I realize that there will then be behind the meter load that potentially increases or decreases, but if you purely just operated a battery 52 times a year to charge off peak, discharge on peak, what does that outcome look like? This slide, I guess, is if you shift your consumption, what you're saying is I didn't use my solar production during the summer load shift. If I go to 20%, what that means is I reduced my load and sent Belmont Light more solar, is effectively what this is describing as the load shifting behavior here. Do I understand that correctly?
Correct. Depending on how big your load is, either you just reduce your load, or if you get your load to zero, then yeah, then your buyback increases.
And so with that, then I think maybe I misread the slides or didn't understand something correctly. Does that mean that your buyback rate is the same as your cost? Because that would be a step function then. If your buyback is a different rate than the avoided cost, if we keep it at 11 cents, but I'm avoiding, 30 cents or whatever the on-peak rate was, I would stop making nearly as much money once I started sending it back, even though we were sort of effectively saying, hey, energy on the system right now is actually worth that much more. So I guess maybe just narrowly to clarify, have we changed the buyback rate under this?
Yes, under this scenario, it's the rate minus the distribution. So rate minus about 8 cents.
So that's, sorry, and when you say the rate, it's the on-peak rate, that high number rate minus distribution.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I didn't catch that from the slide. I think just seeing that numerically would have been, but now I got it. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we should have switched the slides. We actually talked about the buyback at the end, but maybe we should have had it at the front. Okay.
Other questions? Okay.
Okay. So next slide, just quickly, just FYI. So Ben sent me a bunch of data. So this is a profile. We calculated each of the rate A customers individually, so about 10,000. And this is the distribution. And I think, I forget, maybe it was you, Steve, or somebody was asking is what the distribution is, what the impact is. So you can see for just rate A customers, it's about 0, on average or median. And you can kind of see, some people spend less and some people spend more. And that's the distribution for 219. So hypothetically, we're not doing this, but if you did mandate that everybody go on this rate, that's the distribution of the impact or projection of it. And as Mike says, the people on the right, in the positive numbers, maybe they're not paying enough for their power now, right? Maybe they're using expensive power but paying the flat rate, and the people on the left are using more off-peak power but paying that flat rate. So that would be the notion of the fairness that Michael talks about. Let's even that out. But we're not doing mandatory, but just to show you. Okay, quick next slide. All right, do you want to do this, Becca, or?
Sure. So if you recall, not last meeting, but the meeting before, we discussed different buyback scenarios. And what we took away from that was modeling 2 main scenarios. One in which we are having the buyback rate follow time of use, but we are subtracting distribution and crediting generation and transmission. And then the second scenario was crediting generation plus the 2.5 cent adder that we currently compensate under rate EFR. So those are 2 main scenarios we looked at, and we applied them to both the scenarios that we have on the table, the ones with weekends and without. And we just looked at it. This is just showing the impact of Belmont Light at a system level. So if we paid out, so we took our 2019 buyback, which is that 1 million kilowatt hours system-wide, and say we were to put all solar customers on this time of use rate, this would be the impact. So in 2019, we paid the 129,000. And if we had done the same thing on these different rates, this is what we would have paid out. So it's not quite revenue neutral under each scenario, but the difference isn't that high. So we feel that, actually, Craig, maybe I should let you speak to this a bit, but we feel pretty confident that we could recommend going with one of the scenarios where we are crediting generation and transmission and be okay.
I'd say that's pretty well said. It's not much more I need to add to that. But yeah, we're not worried about being a big loser on the buyback side.
This is kind of a worst case scenario if we enrolled all the solar customers, all 360 of them, and paid out at this TOU scenario. So it's
I
a pretty
apologize.
simple analysis.
What's the EF adder again? Just, I apologize, I should know that.
Oh, rate EFR is our current buyback rate. So the 11 cents. The current tariff, rather, that's the name of it, emission-free renewable.
Yeah, thank you. So then,
What would be the, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say, so can you compare which, I'm just trying to think, which row should I look at to see if it's what I'll call the more simplified, just distribution, which I think is the first two rows,
Yep.
and the EFRs in the last one. But I see that there's 2A, 2B.
Yep.
So
So
I don't
ones
see which
with
one's
weekends.
apple to apples to compare. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out which one is only the difference in the buyback rate.
Yeah, it is a little confusing. And so the 1A and 1B is just applying it to weekends and holidays or excluding the weekends and holidays. And then the same thing for the second scenario.
Oh, so so I was thinking 1 and 2s, by the way, is scenario 1 and scenario 2, but that's not what it is.
No.
Because from our first, okay. So,
Oh, that's actually a typo. UFS 2, that should say UFS 2B there in the second, in the last row.
if I compare rows 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, is that the only difference between those rows is the what the buyback rate is that right?
Yep, it's
okay.
Transmission and the EFR credit are different.
Okay,
So
thank you.
generation
So
is
the
being
difference
applied.
is really marginal, $3,000 to $4,000 between.
It is.
Okay, thank you. That was the number I was trying to get to, but yeah, thanks.
And just to make clear, just clarify here, there's no incentive built in here. This is the average rate or the average amount of money Belmont Light would spend to buy power off the grid. Instead, it's getting it from local, PV sources, putting power back on the grid. So there's no incentive built here or anything. It should be, I guess the different ways to look at revenue neutral, but that should be the same as it either buys it from the grid or it buys it from local PV. Same price.
Well, I know I might be one of the, anyway, I appreciate the simplicity of just saying, distribution, because I think the current formula is very similar as this table shows, but I think it's almost easier to describe like on a napkin what the buyback rate is if it's just, oh, we give you the local Belmont Light distribution cost back, or sorry, make you pay for those wires to your house. I think that's pretty clear. So I like the new, whatever I'll call it, more streamlined buyback rate.
And also we like that, we've already gone through the whole process of identifying what our costs are and what our rates are. Why don't we just carry that same methodology over to the buyback side? There's also simplicity there.
I second that. And I think just for clarity and sort of record, it might be helpful to have either in our next meeting presentation on this, but essentially just a table that I can do the math in Excel right now to go back and look at the time of use tables and subtract 8 cents or subtract, I'm not quite sure actually what the rest of the cents are to subtract to sort of look at all of it. But I think just like we have the table of here's the time of use purchase rates, show a table of here's the proposed time of use buyback rates. I think that would just be, when I go and talk to everybody else who's a solar advocate and say, here's what Belmont Light is proposing. Right now, I'm not clearly sure what to say is those numbers. So I think just having that data would be a helpful point. But I appreciate the sort of philosophical approach here of what you're doing.
We have to send out some other materials. We'll send out UFS's updated analysis, the correct one. Why don't we send those rates out with those so you have them in front of you?
Any other questions or comments?
I slip one more. If you're sending out some updated material, would it also be possible to add a slide that just says purely look at a battery arbitraging across the time of use rates and show, again, one of those tables of here's what you could, I guess it's not really, you don't need to do the 20% to 100%, but if I just said, look, I want to put a battery in my home and I'm going to program it to charge fully off peak and I'm going to program it to discharge fully on peak, what is that maximum revenue, which essentially then turns around to, you can do a quick calculation to say what's the payback period for, I could tell you go look on Powerwall website and it costs so much money to buy a 14 kilowatt hour battery. Belmont Light, I plug it into this time of use rate structure, and sort of the theoretical fastest that I could pay that off is X number of years. I think that'd be a helpful sort of concise data point.
Dave, I'll leave that to you. That's a whole new scenario. So would we want to take a bit of time to do that?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I know what you're talking about, Michael. We can do something like that.
And we can connect offline if that's easier. I don't want to be a pain in the butt here. So.
Okay, yeah, maybe I'll send you something and you get your feedback. It'd be great. Make sure it hits the spot.
Okay.
So I think the last slide is outreach. Is that right, Becca? Just some next steps, I guess.
Yeah, I actually made it more specific, Dave, because we're going to talk about outreach in the next agenda subpoint. So this is just talking about the calculator.
Okay. It's, as I mentioned before, the idea for outreach for the pilot is, maybe somebody's interested. Should I join? Should I join? But again, be able to give them an individual number, like, hey, if you use the same, if your load profile is the same as 219 or even 220, here's what it would look for you under this rate. So we got the numbers calculated. I think it's a question of how to present it. I think there's some ambitions, maybe to have, a PDF for each customer with charts and figures and stuff. Maybe it's a lot easier to read than just have a number. But at a minimum, we can give them a number at least. What is the impact to their bill on an annual basis?
This is really cool. But I think that's a good segue into the next agenda item.
I would agree. That was the intent of actually the next item here, the public forum discussion. Really, it was probably would have been better termed kind of next steps. But I would say that we've touched on it pretty deeply, actually, with a lot of Mike's comments, as well as Bob Forrester's earlier comments. That was what we were trying to flush out a little bit here, is what's the data we want to start to present in a public forum? What do we need to do to prepare for these public forums? So there's the calculator, as we just showed on that last slide. We're going to prepare that. And I've been taking notes on some of the comments that the committee has been raising. And really wanted to open it up for discussion with the committee. What, if there's any other particular items they want to see or feel would be important to get in front of the public. And then also we can talk about schedule to some degree there as well.
I see Steve, and then I'll raise my hand, and anyone else just in this first round. Steve, myself, and Bob.
I would just say yes. I mean, it takes a lot of thought to figure out how to present this to the public. There's going to be some people that are very familiar with everything we've talked about, a very small number, however, given the larger number of people in town and the ratepayers in town. And then there's going to be so many people that really are at such a basic level that you're going to have to sort of start by, definitions and trying to get them to understand sort of the whole idea of, capacity and transmission. There's a lot in there that isn't, necessarily intuitive or readily absorbed by folks. So I think that's the big challenge when you go to these public forums.
Bob, why don't you go next? You're muted. Bob, you're muted.
Back on. The comments on the thrust of the presentation, the emphasis here and the number of slides and the detail in the slides, emphasis on load shifting versus investment in technologies. And as I think about our own household here, even 20% is unrealistic. And so to have a meaningful effect here, we'll have to invest in PV, EV, heat pumps, battery storage. And I want to make sure that when you talk about that, that the investment and the payback period includes the cost of installation, as well as just the cost of buying a battery online. So if we overemphasize the load shifting, we're probably going to wind up in a place that's not practical for people. And I say that just thinking of our own use is the biggest effect here is on air conditioning, and load shifting to me in air conditioning would mean turn the temperature to 65 degrees in the morning and nothing in the afternoon. And I think our customer base isn't just likely to do that. And then second, the presentation is, the details are aimed at the effect on PV, EV, and heat pump users in detail. But again, what about the 90% who don't have those?
I would agree with you there, Bob. I will say that the presentation, and Dave and Becca, correct me if you disagree, but the presentation was really meant as a to summarize what we've talked about, to show that the thrust of energization is not going to be impacted negatively by time of use rates. And so the thrust of that was somewhat ignoring everything that you just mentioned, which is, point well taken, that when we do put this in front of our customer base and start to educate, we have to start at the very beginning to everything you just said, and then also show along the way how people that are investing in these other technologies aren't going to be harmed either.
Sure, Craig, and I think the presentation is great. I'm just looking at these other groups of customers who will participate in this.
Yeah, I think my comment then kind of just reiterates that I think this presentation was good for us. Thank you, Becca and Dave. I think it is not the presentation that would be in a public forum. And so both with starting at the beginning, but also with, I think, the emphasis on, a typical household, as Bob mentioned, like one who doesn't have any of the additional electrification technologies or PV. And then I put almost all of the slides that was in this deck as supporting slides. Like, I'm not sure many of these slides and the tables that are here are meant for the public, like the main public forum kind of thing, unless there's a detailed question, which you could pull it up. But that's just, I think, because I think I don't know, I envision the public forum, and maybe this is getting, to some vision of it, but I think it's, a relatively short presentation with some Q&A. And so the presentation should get the definitions and the concepts and, some of the data, and then the Q&A, you could bring up the buyback slide or something if it's really critical, like if there's a detailed question on that or something like that. But
yeah, we never, like Craig said, we never intended this presentation to go to the public. I think the public forum will be a TOU 101, and this was more like a TOU 450 or something. This is just a wrap up for LBAC. So points well taken. Bob, you made me think of something else that Dave and I have talked about, is that as we go into the pilot and enroll customers, we need to think about how to message to people to let them know that investing in technology just because of this pilot is probably not the right way to go, since we don't know if this is going to be a permanent offering or not. We don't want people going out and buying battery storage just because this rate looks attractive. So we have to think about that as we're enrolling and marketing the rate as well.
So maybe I'll just
Can I
pause.
throw real quick in, Travis? Sorry.
Sure.
I think I agree with everything that was said. I think in trying to think through, one thought I just wanted to put out for in thinking through how we do public outreach, explaining cost, causation, et cetera. Even just like a simple graphic of sort of a heat map of when costs of electricity, you know, red during the summer months. Those are the expensive months for power. I'm a sort of lay person, and you need to articulate to me that power in these periods, powers in these times of day costs more. And so we're trying to do that. So some sort of heat map graphic might be helpful. I can't help but connect the time of use and some of the stuff that Bob commented with some of the customers in Texas who had not only time of use, but direct pass-through charges and got nailed. I feel like, you know, customers that aren't going to want to say, hey, you know, it's going to take me 5 minutes to program my thermostat to run the air conditioner in the morning and turn it off in the afternoon. If you're not willing to do that, then don't engage. You don't need to get on the program. I mean, this is really for people who want to be proactive. Maybe there's an opportunity to connect this to all of the various devices the Belmont Light provides incentives for sort of smart electric devices, and Belmont Light could somehow engage with some of that. Like, I don't know if you're able to program people's hot water heaters or thermostats or other things, but you know, I think engaging that way to say, look, here's all these programs we've been incentivizing. Now is the time to actually turn around and use them and get that value and benefit out of them. But I think that the focus here is for the people that want to engage and that can engage, and then the do no harm effect is also there for people that aren't willing to or interested in doing it. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I jumped onto this second item pretty quickly there, but I just wanted to summarize a little bit the rate design discussion that we just had prior to that public forum piece. I think what we had shown there is we've done all of our homework with meeting our 6 goals, and the UFS designed scenario 1 and scenario 2, or A, B, however you want to lay it out, I think is the proper one to move forward on for a pilot. And so our next steps, if everyone's in agreement here, is to begin to circle in the light board, trying to get them a little bit more exposure to what we've been talking about. As we do that, we will be designing and you know, taking all the comments we received today, adding some more meat around what a public forum would look like, some of the tools that we want to develop for those forums, and you know, start to identify that type of discussion as well. Timeline is one that's become really at the forefront for me right now. And so if you recall, and I know I'm a little bit all over the place right now, folks, so thanks for pacifying me, but timeline right now, at the last meeting, we talked about the data that Belmont Light was receiving from our meters. And we had a hole in the data where it was coming across that worried us a little bit. So we have done significant investigations into our data, and our data is in much better shape than I think we originally thought going into this. What we found was that the data from our smart meters is being placed into our meter data management system, which is the NISC system. Our smart meters are the Honeywell system. So the transfer of data from our meters into our NISC system, MDM, is happening. And it's not 100%, but it's pretty darn close to it. So we've got a little bit more homework to do just to investigate why it's not 100%, but it's certainly in a situation where I don't have as many concerns today that I did at the last meeting moving forward with that data. That said, and and this is going to touch on a later item here in my operational updates. We do have a person who has resigned from Belmont Light. It'll be effective this Friday. And that happens to be the person that was really at the forefront of the NISC ERP integration and has taken on a lot of the ownership of our billing system and how it works and what the data flow is with it. So just a bundle of good news this morning, but I'm a little concerned about how that's going to impact us with rolling out our pilot. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm not in a better spot to say that, you know, we can get a pilot out as early as July or not. I just don't have a sense of that today. But I think as we talk through all the information that we need to start to present to the general public, I think July may be pretty aggressive anyways to develop some of these tools and some of this information and have a public forum. Our thought all along was that we would have a public forum and take that feedback and also provide that to our light board in concert with LBAC, obviously, to make the recommendation on why this is the right thing to do. And I'm just not sure if it's all going to come together in that time frame at this point. But I just wanted to kind of throw that out there and see if anyone had any concerns or questions or oppositions to that. But I think that we got quite a bit of work in front of us still to do, and I just wanted to recognize that, I guess.
Any questions or comments? Well, Craig, I think that was thanks for the update, and thanks for just summarizing sort of the next steps and also the timeline. And I'm sorry to hear about the staff turnover. So I believe the light board meeting is Monday. Will you be presenting this Monday, or did what you just said say you're not ready to bundle it up and present it to them? So the intent of this Monday is to just start the discussion with the light board, get them back involved with where we are. Pretty much, again, unless I hear differently from the committee today, but we're going to present to them that we have an agreement on what we think a pilot should look like as far as the rates and what we think is appropriate, that we're still doing some deeper investigation into some items. We certainly have to loop in the public, which I'm sure they'll appreciate. And we have more homework to do, but we just wanted to really get them back included into the conversation. It's been several months since they had been involved, and with the change at the light board level with Mark coming on and Tom leaving us, we thought it was also a good time to get Mark involved a little bit so he can see what we're working on and where things are going. And then the expectation would be, at a future date, whatever date that might be, we would provide to the light board a formal recommendation on moving forward with a pilot, and then at the end of the pilot have a formal recommendation to either move forward with a mandatory time of use or opt-in, opt-out type of program, or how we evolve the pilot. So would it be useful? Sorry, Steve, were you about to say something? Okay. So would it be useful? I sense that you're asking, and I want to make sure that not read too much into this. Do you need a vote from us to basically say, please include weekends? Like, it sounds like you want to present the consensus of this group, the rate structure, and what the pilot should be. And given that there's an option 1, option 2 scenario, A, B, whatever, I kind of heard you ask, like, you'd like to present the one that will be the pilot. Is that, do you need a vote from us? I think a vote or a recommendation from LBAC would certainly be helpful, and I'm sure that the board is going to ask for LBAC's recommendation anyways. What we were going to show the board was both options, and so that they understand the impact of the nights and weekends, or excluding nights and weekends, and why that's in there. But I certainly think that a recommendation from the committee would not hurt,
the cause one way or the other, whether the committee feels that including the nights and weekends to lower that off-peak rate in the summer is appropriate or not. So yes, I wasn't exactly asking that, but I think that that would be very helpful.
Great. Well, I'm actually going to just give a slight pause. So committee members, I would love to hear if anyone has a proposal. Maybe it's short because we have discussed this for months now. But is there any public comment on any of this short interventions from non-committee members at the moment before we do a quick deliberation? Seeing no one, Michael.
Quick clarification. I was flipping back on my slide deck to just remind myself exactly what the two of those would be. I had a note that says, I think Dave, you made the comment, this is just power supply costs and the distribution rate is fixed. And I think I heard you say that there would be some thought to come back in a year to address something there. So I just had a pin there to say, are these fully baked, or is there some intention that we're going to potentially later tweak distribution, maybe above a certain volumetric? Can you just make sure that did I mishear something, or is there an intent to maybe go back and change something else effectively that would?
I can't speak for the committee, obviously, but just my thoughts and talking about Becca about this. I think at the next rate impact study, you can look at these certain technologies and what they cost as far as distribution goes, because I do think you want a solid number as much as possible on what the impact on the distribution is. But I'll turn it over to Rebecca, but I think that was my thinking, is that, you know, maybe at the next rate study to really address that question you just asked.
I mean, cost of service study as opposed to rate.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and then I think they can jump into the details and get a pretty, you know, solid number on. I'm guessing, you know, heat pumps probably overpay on distribution, but it would be nice to have a solid methodology behind it. And it feels like this time of use as is now is pretty much a lot to chew on, you know.
And if that's the case, then I guess that gives me a little bit of pause to say we do a huge rate shift for time of use. This is fundamentally radically different and new.
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever that cost of power study occurs, we potentially do another one. And that's just a lot to, like, yes, time of use is a lot to chew on, but I now have some hesitation to do a whole bunch of changes with time of use, get everybody thinking about that, and then potentially come back and say, now we're really going to shift around your costs and time again.
Yeah,
I'm a little worried there. So hopefully that's additional context for Becca or Craig or whoever else to help unpack.
I guess my comment would be that we do that study every 3 to 5 years anyway. So that's part of our standard process. Well, recently it has been. And I don't think things would change that drastically. That's just my thought on it, but maybe I'm simplifying what you were thinking, Dave. But the current distribution rate was informed by our last cost of service study in 19. So there was the science behind that. I don't see it changing too much if we look at this again, but.
And I would agree with that. That was my thought exactly, is one of the reasons why we used the UFS on this rate design at the outset was because they did do our cost of service. They had all of our data and they had a good command of where we are as a utility. And so using that, these are the rates they came up with. I don't see our rates drastically changing in the coming years. So I wasn't as worried either about rolling out a pilot with these rates that have been identified. And then when we go through another cost of service study in several years or so, changing those. I think that it's somewhat still important for us to remember the timing of rolling this out. We still have a little bit of runway in front of us to get this organized. And then we want to do the pilot for about a year, we talked about. And so that's going to push us right to the new cost of service study. And so if the data we gather from this pilot shows that it's worth moving forward, or maybe it's worth pulling back, or however we decide what direction to go in. We'll have that data, we'll have the new cost of service study to inform the numbers that will be in the new rates, if any change at all. And we'll be able to make that one change for the next 3 to 5 years at that point. So.
Okay, that's helpful. I think my head was time of use is largely changing how we allocate effectively demand charges. So it's capacity and transmission charges. We're also baking in changes in volumetric consumption costs. So power in the winter is maybe more expensive than power in the shoulder seasons, and summer is more expensive than shoulders. And then I thought I had heard in the earlier discussion back on one of the early slides that we would be modifying. The one thing we haven't changed here is our distribution costs. And the piece there being, if I use 10,000 kilowatt hours in a year, am I overpaying on my distribution charges? Because I don't think it's necessarily a linear connection there to say, if you use 10,000 or you use 5,000 or you use 1,000 kilowatt hours a year, does the cost of Belmont Light's maintenance of the distribution system linearly scale with that? And so I had heard, and what I caught on to was somebody saying,
Mike, are you talking about my question about the inclining black rate at 1600 kWh for the distribution charge? And
effectively, like if you're,
that guy, I think, addressed that. And I don't think that's going to make a huge difference here one way or the other.
Well, I would also say that if you might recall, but in our cost of service study, and in fact, in the original time of use discussion we had several months ago, we did ask to raise our fixed charges from the $10.60 to $20. And that is a direct answer, I think, to what you're saying, Mike. So our cost of service study has told us that the proper way of allocating our fixed costs was with that fixed charge of $20 is the appropriate number. Now the board, when they approves the cost of service study, chose to stay with the 1060. And so there is a little bit of variance in our fixed charges, as you just described, because of that. So this is it's an interesting dynamic, because time of use is really almost doing everything that they chose not to approve with the fixed charges from the original cost of service. So I think that as we evolve, as this goes on, the next cost of service, whatever our fixed charges should be or are identified as, we might have a better opportunity to set those correctly so that they're not being subsidized across different rate classes in general, it's the subgroups within those classes.
And let me also say, because I've been through a number of cost of service studies, even if there is, usually you come up, something needs to be changed. It doesn't need to be changed necessarily all at once, Michael. So a lot of times these things are phased in over a period of years. So typically, I mean, I don't think we should be worried about a new cost of service study here. There's lots of ways to deal with changes if they need to be made.
And actually, Michael, if it helps, we do have each of the time of use scenarios, what they look like under a $10 charge and a $15 charge. I can send you those. It's not a huge difference in terms of the rates. And I can't remember, Dave, if we actually analyzed those customer impacts. I think we did, didn't we?
We may have, I forget.
Yeah. Okay, let me dig through and I'll send you anything we have on that. Might make you feel a little better.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to push this any more than just to make sure that changing things a lot frequently is hard for customers to understand. And so it would seem to me that if we fairly reflected distribution costs with sort of a cap above a certain threshold or something like that, that could have a big impact on some customer classes. It sounds like everyone here is saying, no, that's not actually true. I'm not sure that I totally believe that. But if there's something that we can do that says, look, Mike, you're forgetting that as we went through this process, we've effectively showed that here and there. that makes me feel better. We're not going to have a potential rate shock in 2 or 3 years if two things happen in close succession.
Yeah, all I'm saying, Michael, is the cost of service study just gives the policymaker a guide to what should, you know, what should happen at some point. At some point, it doesn't mean that there needs to be an abrupt change in the rates at that point. It just means that you have to figure out some sort of continuity to ideally get to where the cost of service study wants you to go to. So
I hear you, Stephen. I think my point here is that if we're doing an abrupt change with time of use, these rates look fundamentally different. And we know there could be, coming out of a cost of power service study, the need to make a change. If you're making one change, why not make all of them at once? And so just asking the question to say, if there's a potential coming out of this, should we be thinking to say, we're already kind of tapping the brakes here on when we deploy this, tap them a little bit harder so that, or accelerate the cost of service study so that we can fold everything into one shift and come out with a unified message of we've correctly allocated all of the different costs of everything into one proposed change. So it's just a question to say, should we be considering making all the changes in a single package versus spreading them out over a longer period of time?
I guess that's up to Craig and Becca and Ben and others, but I mean, there's always going to be changes going forward. And I mean, you're right, you should be anticipating what's happening and coming in down the road, but there's always going to be changes, and I don't know how much you want to tap the brakes to reflect.
Yeah,
And I encourage, so I'm also doing a time check. We are already almost approaching 2 hours and we still have several items here. But I encourage I like, the way I look at it is we're going to be 2 years from now, we're going to be meeting and discussing whether or not there should be a rate change. We're going to have the data from the pilot and everything else. That's still like 2 years away. So I think the interesting thing is that might be the start of the cost of service study, because that's sort of, and I think what Michael's saying is maybe there is something to consider about start, you know, instead of waiting 4 years to do a cost of service study, do it in 3 years so that we have the new data as we're having this discussion about what the overall, you know, post pilot about the time of use stuff.
Yeah.
So that, because that could provide useful data. But I think that we don't need to get into the details now. I think that's something, Craig, you can consider as things, and, you know, we could launch the pilot and see if it somehow gets pushed all the way to fall, then that's also changing the timeline. So.
And I think because it's a pilot, we have to be very clear to the customers that enroll that things could change at any time.
Yeah,
like
and
the customers should go into it expecting change. Actually, like we're testing out these rates.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So I would entertain a suggestion for which scenario you are, as a committee, we could endorse. That would be, I think, between A and B, or 1 and 2. Weekends or not weekends is the choice here. Does anyone not feel we're ready to make a decision to support one or the other? Okay, then I'm not seeing any major. I would propose that we to A, which is the one that includes weekends. For the pilot, just noting that it's again limited to the pilot as opposed to like what Belmont Light rolls out, you know, to all ratepayers 2 or 3 years from now. Okay, well, so if someone would motion that, then, you know, and move that, then I think we could do a quick vote of
John Abbott, second.
Steve, did you have a comment?
Let me just say, I you know, for the pilot, I agree. I mean, there is a reason why the rate is so much higher without weekends and holidays. And that's because those hours aren't peak hours. As you know, Dave has said, you had enough non-peak hours, you can lower the rate. But the whole point is, in some respects, I mean, I understand you don't want to have such a dramatic difference between on and off peak, but in some respects, you're trying to model what the real cost of those on-peak hours are. So for the purposes of the pilot, I'm fine with this, but I just don't know down the road what the real answer is here.
Okay. And I know, without rehashing it all, we have said some of the peaks have landed on the weekends, but Becca, I know you probably knows off the top of your head, but anyway. Okay, Michael.
I'm sorry, Trevor, which scenario are you recommending? What you said, and now
I
the
believe it is
conversation has
A.
confused me.
I believe it is A off in the first few slides, it was A. Which is the UFS with weekends. And I believe it was 49 cents is the peak in summer.
Yeah, the very first slide, it was scenario 1.
Scenario one.
45.
Excuse me. Sorry, the number in letters changed, I think, but yeah.
Yeah.
So scenario 1.
Yes. Okay, current USF scenario 1's weekend holiday included, on-peak rate in the summer is $4.57, off-peak $1.33, on-peak in the winter is $2.99, off-peak is $1.38.
Correct, that's the one.
Thank you.
I heard John second it, so I guess that's on the table. I'll say Travis Frank, aye. Ralph? You're muted. Ralph, is it aye? Dave?
Dave Evers, aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Michael?
Michael McRae, aye.
Bob?
Bob Forster, aye.
John?
John Abe, aye.
Great. Okay. So Craig, I hope we still have some time for your updates and things, but do you want to do the hydropower contract, please?
Do you want?
Uh,
Dave?
what-
I said, Travis, do we need, just for Craig's purposes, should we also vote on the, for recommendation on the buyback? 'Cause I think that's still out there, right?
Yeah, if you feel it was separate somehow, then what the numbers that we just voted on. To me, I think it was kind of included with the buyback,
Was it
the model
included?
buyback.
Okay, if it's included, then that's cool.
Yeah, through, I'm sorry.
Would anyone, I'll say, would Belmont feel better if we weighed in on that specifically?
I would, because we had 2 tables on the scenario. One was crediting generation and transmission, and one just purely from the main scenarios, and one was crediting at rate EFRs.
Okay, well then let's just quickly do this. Would anyone take a motion to change the solar buyback to include to be simply the time of use rate, or the existing rate minus? Is this going to change it? Not for the current EFR, right? Like if I don't opt in for time of use, am I going to still have the same, or are you guys going to change it for everyone?
Only
This
for
would
time
only
of use
be
customers.
The time of use pilot.
Okay.
Okay.
So for those who opt in for the time of use, it'll be the existing rate minus distribution. Would anyone like to move that?
I move for the pilot that the buyback rate be the TOU rate minus distribution.
Okay, and I heard Michael second it. Right, Michael? I think I saw. Okay, Travis Frank, aye. Ralph?
Ralph Jones, aye.
Dave?
Dave Evers, aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Michael?
Michael McRae, aye.
Bob?
Bob Forster, aye.
And John?
John Abe, aye.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Hydro, please, Craig.
All right. So we have an existing hydro contract that is coming to expiration at the end of May. And just at a high level, this just came across our desk and they're looking for a quick turnaround. So we already had the agenda put together. So unfortunately, we don't have an executive session. So I'm going to not go into details on numbers, but just present what's in front of us here. So we have an existing hydro. Right now, it's known as Brown Bear 2, I believe. Formerly, it was known as Miller Hydro. And I think the new one they're calling Warumbo. So it's got a bunch of different names here, but pretty much the previous version of this, Brown Bear 2, was a 5-year contract. And we take about 18,500 megawatt hours from that contract. So it's a very small number, about 3% of our portfolio. As I said, that expires the end of May of this year. And they are now offering a new 4.5-year contract to expire at the end of November 2025. Without, again, getting to the specific numbers, the dollar we pay today will be the dollar we end up paying 4.5 years from today. So in other words, they're going to reset this contract where year one is what we were paying 4 years ago for power. And so it goes back approximately about $4 a megawatt hour, and then, or a kilowatt hour, no, megawatt hour, I'm sorry. And works its way back up with a 2% escalator, which is pretty standard on these contracts. And so what I'm saying is we go back $4 a megawatt hour, and by the end of 2025, we're paying that year what we paid actually today for the same contract. So it's relatively no extra costs as if we were just extending this, for a 5-year extension type of thing. In fact, it would be a little bit cheaper for us. With it does come RECs. So we have 1 REC per obviously a megawatt, and the RECs are made up of a very small percentage of class 1. It's about 5. And then 95% of the RECs would be class 2, main class 2s. So they're not as valuable as we all know as class 1 RECs, but they certainly do go a long way to meet our power supply policy of being 100% non-emitting by the end of next year.
Greg, what would you like from us, like input wise, or how do you, and first, do you have a timeline, and also do you have a timeline for the decision?
Yeah, so I need to provide a decision to our vendor E&E by the end of the day today on whether to move forward or not. They're going to take our answer, and if we give them the answer, as I mentioned, this goes back about $4 a megawatt hour. We would give them approval to negotiate for no more than that dollar value, so that nothing changes from what we're talking about at the moment. So yes, I am looking for a vote, if you will, to give me the I guess the recommendation to move forward and lock this in, or get involved with it to secure this power. And I know I said a lot all at once there, but basically it's small, 3% of our portfolio. It's a 4.5-year contract, and the offtake that we've been taking is approximately 18,500 megawatts for the whole length of the contract. So it should be right about that for the new contract, because nothing else is changing. The terms of the contract that we have in place today are really not changing, just the dollar value. And again, like I said, that's being reset back as a do-over.
Questions or comments?
I support extending and going along with the proposal that Craig set out.
I think it's hard to get into the details without a sort of executive session, but I guess that was my initial take. John, I think you're coming off mute, so go ahead. Maybe not. Okay.
My one question would be, Craig, is why wouldn't you do this?
Exactly. So I'm with you. That was my thought. I just out of the teamwork and what we try to accomplish, I wanted to bring it through the committee because I had the time to do that. I do have the right, as you all know, the power supply policy does allow the GM to make this purchase, but I wanted to bring it to the committee, let you know what was going on with this opportunity, and let you know that we thought it was a good opportunity. We wanted to take it, but we figured since we had the time to discuss it, we'd get the input.
Michael?
I support this. I think I concur with the way that you answered that, Craig, and why wouldn't you do it? The only piece, and it's not a reason not to do it, but just to restate my previous positions on main class 2 RECs is, I think from an energy procurement standard, from a cost maintenance standard, it's the right move to do. If there was an option to discard those main RECs and shave a couple pennies off the contract, I would support that, but I'm not going to make us think about it today.
Mike, I knew you were going to bring that up, so I have a little info for you, which is we will be able to claim all these class 2 RECs under the new Muni RPS. So if we sign a PPA with main class 2 RECs, we can claim them. If we were to just buy them on the market, we can't get credit for them.
Well, trying to move things along. So first off, Craig, I appreciate that you came to us and the working relationship was good. And hopefully this isn't that painful for this process, so I appreciate that. But I would, you were looking for a vote, so I would entertain a motion to continue exploring the extension of the hydro contract with Brown Bear, aka whatever it's known as now. I don't think the chair, can the chair move? I think I've never seen you do that, Steve. So I've been always wanting someone else to make the motion, but maybe I'll move. Does anyone second?
Second.
Okay, Ralph. Travis Frank, aye. Ralph?
Ralph Jones, aye.
Dave?
Dave Evers, aye.
Steve?
Steve Flansky, aye.
Michael?
Michael McCray, aye.
Bob? I see Bob's lips move. He says aye, I think.
Aye.
And John?
John Abe, aye. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Craig. And for your update, please.
Yes, I'll move through the next items pretty quick. We have about 7 minutes or so left. So I kind of touched on this earlier. Unfortunately, it seems like every step forward we take 2 steps back. So over the last year, we've been trying to fill a position, our procurement position here. And we had one round of interviews several months ago, and it fell through for us. All the candidates kind of disappeared. And so we went back out to the street. We got some really good candidates. We have an offer presently out to a candidate that we like a lot. Hopefully they agree to come on board with us. But unfortunately, at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, we did lose 2 employees actually. One of my linemen, a 16-year employee of the light department, has resigned. He will be going over to Eversource. He's chasing the money, if you will. And so we wish him well. It'll hurt because he's a fully rated, qualified lineman, and they're hard to come by. It takes about 5 years to train a lineman to just be a first class, never mind the experience you get throughout your career. So that hurts us, but we wish him well. And the other, as I mentioned earlier, Jim Zacco, who presently oversees our customer service as well as our ERP implementation, is leaving us as well. He's leaving us this Friday, where the lineman's leaving us a week from Friday. And that's going to be a big loss. Becca will be taking over our customer service group. So I know she'll do a fantastic job there. But the ERP piece is going to be a little bit of a hole for us for the time being. So as I said earlier, I really don't have a sense right now the impact of that on the time of use. But I do know that the billing is obviously very sensitive to us to make sure that we get that right out of the gate, and that might take us some time to really make sure we have someone that's on top of that. So this is kind of, as I said, just starting, just happening. So unfortunately, I guess it is what it is right now. With that, I'll jump on to legislative update. Becca already touched upon it. So the new, I think the bill is that the governor just signed was SB, what is it? SB 9 was the bill, the new I'm drawing a blank. What's the word?
Climate
Oh.
change
Yes,
legislation.
thank you. Thank you very much. But in that legislation, there was I guess, a section or an Article 33, which all the municipals had a big hand in putting together. And really what it did is we set our own minimum requirements for renewables in our portfolio. I will say that it's really invisible to Belmont Light because we're well above that, meeting those requirements. As you all know, we'll be 100% non-emitting as of the end of next year. And so we're going to be in front of this, and it's going to be a small impact to us. But I did want to point out that it does hold municipals accountable to meet a renewable portfolio, where in the past we weren't. So I guess that's good news. If depending on how you want to look at it, I think it's good news. And as Mike kind of touched upon, the class 2 RECs are not as valuable, the main class 2 RECs. So in some regards, if we were to buy those RECs in the future, it wouldn't count. But in the contract that we just talked about, the one-off direct contract, they do count. So right now it's okay, but we still have plenty of time. It's about 10 years, 2030 to get to 50%, I think is the number that the order states. So we got plenty of time to kind of get there. Like I said, we're well ahead of the game there anyways.
Well, we are way over that now. I mean,
Yep. It's
I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, we're scheduled to be 100% by next year, as I understand it. So, I mean, this is a sort of a minimal threshold that the state has imposed, kind of for people who are really laggards, which we are not.
Absolutely. And I thought it was notable. One is because it does give all municipal public power entities a goal that they have to reach. But as Steve just reiterated, we're well above that already. So for us, it's really just it's a nothing for us. It's just something I thought that, if people hadn't heard, I wanted to make sure people knew that change was there.
So Craig and I don't know, maybe Aiden, Justice, I feel we might need to revisit, or just, it could be a short, I don't know if it's going to be a revisit or it's just going to be a short check on whatever our purchase plan that has our timeline, just to make sure it aligns. I think we had criteria where basically said we'd do whatever, we'd buy RECs that match sort of the legislation. And now that the legislation's changed, I want to make sure that language is up to date and follows. So it doesn't have to be today or anything else, but it's just like, and it doesn't even have to be next meeting, but I think it's something that we should put on a future agenda.
We're 100% in agreement. Myself and Becca talked about this yesterday, actually, about making sure that our purchase or power supply policy is in compliance with what this ruling, this law, if you will, states, just to keep it all, in concert with each other.
Great.
Yeah, there's two main things. One, the current targets only go through 2022, so we're going to have to revisit it soon anyway. And it binds us to CES, so the Clean Energy Standard. So we might want to replace that target with this muni. Well, we actually probably have to because we're now mandated at the state level, but we can decide whether we want to exceed these minimum standards or not.
Great. So I just appreciate it if you guys work towards putting it on an agenda in the whenever, reasonable time frame, few meetings or months from now.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, and I know it's 9:30, so in the interest of time, I'll jump to Certificate of Excellence and Reliability. I just wanted the group to know that we were recognized this year by the American Public Power Association, that we're basically in the top 25% of all utilities that report their metrics to American Public Power under SAIDI, which stands for System Average Interruption Duration. So not the frequency of outages, but the length of the time that you're actually out when you do have an outage. And our numbers from 2015 through 2019 put put us in the top 25%, again, of all public power utilities, not just the Northeast, but across the United States. And they recognized us with the Certificate of Excellence for that purpose.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good team, everyone there at Belmont. Michael.
Yeah, I want to second that for congratulations. And I think this is really something Belmont Light should feel very proud of and take full credit for, because, you know, everything we were just talking about, electrification, et cetera, we are increasingly very reliant on Belmont Light. So the stability and reliability of that power, I think, is an essential component of what we've got in town. So accolades and kudos to everybody that made that happen. I do have one nuanced question. Is there a minimum duration for that outage? And the reason why I ask is I know that momentary outages of several cycles as opposed to seconds can be a huge impact for some types of facilities, hospitals, anybody with sensitive computers, et cetera. Is that baked in there, or is this more looking at sort of seconds? Is there a minimum time period, and is momentary outages? I'd be happy to park that question and let you answer it at a later meeting, recognizing the time, but just on the topic, it stood out as potentially something to be aware of.
Yeah, there's I have to get the details, and I can do that at a later meeting, but my understanding and what I've been exposed to, different utilities do it differently. And so there's not necessarily a set formula, but I do know, for instance, in my past career at the IOUs, they excluded any outage that was less than a minute, less than one customer. Belmont Light, I can actually tell you that we include all of our outages, but we don't consider a blip or a brownout, if you will, an outage. So unfortunately, I think a lot of utilities do it differently. And so you're not always comparing 100% apples to apples, but from what a brownout is to an actual outage for any length of time, I think there's some wiggle room there that people decide how best to use that. So it'd be very difficult to capture the impact of that short timeline for a calculation, I think.
Well, I'm sure there's plans, but feel free to, promote this. It can be one of the slides at the public forum for time of use rates. It could be various other things. If there's a town meeting venue, which I know is coming up in a month. I don't know if Belmont Light has a slot there, but
we do, by the way. So
yeah.
I just asked the other day to provide a report to the town at town meeting on our substation project. So
great. So yeah, thank you. Anything else for Craig? Michael.
Yeah, and I don't want to necessarily take up too much time here, but I did want to note our streets just recently got our LED light upgrades. There was a small riot in the streets for the first 2 nights because the lights were much brighter than anybody wanted. But I have a huge thank you to Craig, to Mark, Chief of Operations, for expeditiously, rapidly stepping in. And it's a simple software update to lower the lights, and now everybody thinks it's wonderful. So the only comment that I would have there is nobody on the block knew who did the light change or who to talk to about the issues there. So I think to the extent that there's some ability as those changes go through to do maybe targeted customer outreach or flyers or something just to let other people know. Because I remember hearing Becca at some point months ago mention easy software control of LED light settings. And so I immediately said, I'm going to email Becca and figure out how to do this. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for Becca, most people in the town don't know her. And so she's not getting inundated with emails from everyone. But I think just somehow improving that outreach, which can also be a branding opportunity of, hey, we're doing energy efficiency savings, we're improving all of these benefits. And if there's any issues, please contact Belmont Light. We're the ones that can quickly adjust it, and so easily did. So I think just to help streamline that rollout, I'm assuming there's a lot of customers out there that maybe still have bright lights and don't know that they could adjust them and improve their indoor quality of life. But whatever can be done there, I think would be a helpful improvement in that rollout. But otherwise, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that, but in the interest of time, I kind of skipped it. But I will say that we have a whole page on our website dedicated to the streetlights. We actually had our engineer in charge of that work do an interview, if you will. I forget if it was the Belmont 20 in or the Belmont Buzz or one of those groups there. But in looking at our website, I talked with Aiden. We're going to put a link on the front page so that people can find that page and get that information more readily. And to Mike's point, if anyone's not aware, we do have the ability for all the new LED streetlights that we're putting in to control the light output. So what we did is we purchased lights that the LED bulb itself, if you call it a bulb, is approximately like 36 or 37 watts, but it equals the lumen output of a 70-watt high-pressure sodium, which is a typical light that is on the Belmont city streets for all the neighborhoods. So we're still providing a 70-watt output. We even went down to a 2700 Kelvin yellow hue, if you will. It's a little bit yellower than the bright white of an LED that you could get as well. So we got that information from customers and customer outreach in the past. And but as Mike found out and some of his neighbors found out, it may still be pretty bright. Even, you know, it's still a different different light, if you will. So we have the ability to zoom out or to lower the dim those lights, basically, right? And the other piece that we got to be careful with that we'll keep an eye on is when a LED light is installed, if it's not 100% flat or 90 degrees to the road, shooting the light down, and if it's up a little bit like that, it's going to throw the light differently. So we'll reiterate with our linemen to make sure that, you know, when they're done, they bend, if you will, that light so that it's as close to a 90 degree as possible. And if that's not enough, we do have the ability to put different shading on those lights, different I'm thinking of a horse with the eye blocks there.
Blinders of some sort.
Yeah, to really, you know, aim that light straight down and not have it go off and to the left and to the right stuff. So appreciate the feedback on that. And yeah, we'll see what we can do a better job of letting customers know that we're going to be out in the neighborhoods putting those lights up.
And I think, you know, just to reiterate, it's the ability to fix it is there and the information on the website is there, but nobody on the block knew that it was even, you know, they wanted to know who at City Hall to call because they thought it was, you know, town highway or town someone else. I think just a lot of customers don't connect streetlights with Belmont Light. So, you know, to the extent that even if there's a flyer that goes up on one of the utility poles, just something to give people the pointer to go. I'd email the list. Phil Thayer could tell you how many people are on it. And not a single one of the most sort of active group of community sort of electricity enthusiasts were aware that you could do this. And everyone's suggestion was put up, you know, stronger curtains in your bedroom, which if Belmont Light can readily solve that problem, I think just connecting those dots so that everybody knows to call in and say, hey, you know, can you adjust this? Or maybe it's also changing the default setting that lights are deployed at and go the other way to say if people don't feel like it's bright enough, let them call in for increased brightness. But the default setting was too bright. So I don't want to take them any more time today, but I just a couple points of feedback but otherwise kudos for rapidly solving a problem.
Thank you.
Great. I will table the structural change impact groups update for another meeting. We didn't get to the energy stuff in the review this last week. So I think it'll be better just to wait to when I can present the options and discuss it at that point. So the last thing is future meetings. We meet in a little over a month on May 12th. And that's it.
I move we adjourn.
Move to adjourn. I'll second. Travis Frank, aye. Ralph motions his hand, yes. Dave's yes. Steve Klininski. Okay, well, sorry, I was trying to have people who are unmuted speak their name, but sure, go ahead. Michael McRae.
Michael McRae, aye.
Bob Forrester, aye.
And John.
John Abe, aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and apologies for running a little long today. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.